Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into one of the really gripping, maybe even unnerving parts of modern warfare. It's the story of megabombs.
Right. And these aren't just, your standard large bombs. We're talking colossal non-nuclear weapons.
Exactly. Designed with, well, destructive power that starts to rival small tactical nukes. And this is the crucial bit, without that devastating long-term radioactive fallout.
It's not just about making a bigger explosion for its own sake. There's a very specific strategic reason behind them, tackling a unique global issue.
And that issue, really, it all comes down to what we often call the nuclear taboo.
hmm This sort of informal but incredibly strong global understanding, backed up by treaties, of course, against actually using nuclear weapons.
It's a vital guardrail, thankfully. It's prevented horrors we can barely imagine. But that taboo, it also created a kind of gap, a strategic void.
Absolutely. Nations still felt they needed options for situations demanding huge localized force, and that's where these non-nuclear giants, these megabombs, they really stepped in.
It's fascinating how that taboo, born from the absolute horror of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, actually pushed military innovation in this direction.
It really did. I mean, if you can't use your ultimate weapon because the global condemnation, the risk of escalation is just too immense.
Then you have to find the next best thing, right? Or maybe the most powerful next best thing.
Precisely. And these megabombs became that alternative. They deliver, force comparable to a small tactical nuke, but critically, no lingering radiation. It's a calculated response to a massive geopolitical constraint.
Exactly. And that's really our mission today, to unpack this paradox. We want to explore why these huge weapons were developed, who actually has them.
And maybe most importantly, who has actually used them in real combat situations.
Because that's the kicker, isn't it?
There.
Several nations have developed these absolute monsters, but there's this stark reality.
Only one. Only one nation has actually deployed these giants in wartime.
And that single fact tells you so much about how global military strategy actually plays out on the ground. It's a profound difference.
It really is a remarkable divergence, a strategic split. The need to find alternatives to nukes became, well, incredibly powerful after 1945.
Nations still needed ways to obliterate hardened targets or clear huge areas.
But without triggering that global nuclear panic or the environmental catastrophe that follows, these megabombs filled that specific niche.
Their power, okay, it's not matching strategic nukes, but it's definitely in the league of smaller tactical ones. But like you said, crucially, no radioactive fallout to deal with for decades.
So when we look at who's actually put them to work, the United States stands out. They have a unique and pretty extensive combat record with these things.
Let's start with maybe the classic example, the Daisy Cutter, officially the BLU-82.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
A hefty piece of equipment, 6,800 kilograms, I believe.
That's right. And its main job wasn't just random destruction. It was designed for a very specific task, clearing massive landing zones and dense jungle.
Almost like a giant tactical lawnmower for forests, if you can picture that, a very powerful one.
We saw it used effectively first in Vietnam, didn't we? Where creating those instant clearings for helicopters was vital.
Absolutely critical in that terrain.
Yeah.
But it proved versatile. It was used later in the Gulf War and then again in Afghanistan back in 2001. Showed its utility across different environments.
They made quite a few, too. Around 225 were produced before it was retired in 2008. Its ability to just create those big clearings instantly was pretty undeniable.
Definitely. But if the Daisy Cutter was impressive, well, the U.S. decided to go even bigger.
Which brings us to the MOAB, the GBU-43B Massive Ordnance Air Blast.
Or, as everyone knows it, the mother of all bombs.
Yeah, the nickname stuck. And it wasn't just hype. This thing is enormous, 9,850 kilograms.
Truly massive. And it's designed not just for the explosion, but for the devastating pressure wave it creates over a wide area. An airburst weapon, primarily.
And we saw its first combat use, quite famously, in Afghanistan in 2017.
Right, against ISIS targets. They were dug into those mountain tunnel complexes, very hard to reach.
And they only ever built about 15 of them, which tells you something about how specialized it is. It's not an everyday weapon.
No, definitely not. Its yield, around 11 tons of TNT equivalent, can flatten structures, collapse tunnels across a significant radius. It's for immense localized destruction, but without those wider nuclear implications.
That first use in Afghanistan was a big signal, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It showed a clear willingness to use these very high-yield, non-nuclear options when facing threats that were so dug in, so protected, that normal bombs just weren't cutting it. It was a message, really, as much as an attack.
But the U.S. megabomb story doesn't even end there. As incredible as the MOAB is, there was a need for something that could go deeper.
Which led to the MOP, the GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator.
Even bigger again. This one clocks in at a colossal 12,304 kilograms.
And its role is very, very specific. It's the ultimate bunker buster.
It's got this hardened steel casing, right? Engineered specifically to punch deep underground through layers of reinforced concrete, rock.
Before it detonates. Yeah, think of it like a supersized, high-tech jackhammer delivering an explosive payload right where it's needed, deep down.
Its development took a long time, apparently, 14 years.
It did. Speaks to the engineering challenge, doesn't it? Creating something that can burrow that effectively. And it saw a significant deployment recently over Iran.
That was striking. They built 20 and used 14 in just one attack.
Which indicates a very specific, high-value target. Almost certainly deeply buried, heavily reinforced facilities, places where that deep penetration capability was absolutely essential.
It highlights a clear strategy, needing the ability to neutralize threats that are otherwise almost untouchable by conventional means.
Exactly. So that's the U.S. side, a unique record of actual combat deployment.
But what about other major powers? They haven't just been watching, have they?
Not at all. They've been very active in testing the limits, too, just not using them in anger, so to speak. Take Russia's answer to the MOAB.
The FOAB, right. The father of all bombs. The names are quite something.
Hey, yes. They tested their version back in 2007.
Yeah.
And it's a different type of weapon, a thermobaric bomb.
Okay, so how does that work differently?
Well, it disperses this fine aerosol, like a fuel cloud, and then ignites it. It uses the oxygen in the ambient air for a super hot, sustained explosion.
Ah, so it's particularly nasty in enclosed spaces like caves or tunnels.
Precisely. It essentially burns up the oxygen and creates this massive vacuum effect, incinerating everything inside. Very effective for those kinds of targets. Its reported yield is huge, 244 tons TNT equivalent.
Wow. But the key difference here is...
Tested only, never deployed in actual conflict. Unlike the American bombs, it shows a different approach, maybe signaling capability, deterrence, rather than active use.
And China, are they in this game too?
They are, though perhaps with a slightly different focus. In 2024, they tested a device, much smaller, only 2 kilograms.
2 kilograms? That sounds tiny compared to the others.
It is, relatively. And importantly, it's not a nuclear weapon, though some descriptions might sound confusing. It seems to be an advanced thermobaric device, maybe using hydrogen-rich fuel.
And what does it do?
It creates an incredibly intense but localized burst of heat, a 1,000 degrees Celsius fireball. So, less about blast, more about intense focused heat.
Like a military-grade marshmallow rooster.
Okay. Maybe a bit more intense than that. But yes, the focus seems different. Perhaps for clearing personnel in very tight spaces, incinerating specific equipment, denying access.
But again, the crucial point.
Tested only, just like Russia's FOAB. Never used in warfare.
Right.
So you see this pattern emerging. U.S. combat use versus Russian and Chinese testing.
That really highlights a fundamental difference in, well, maybe willingness to cross a certain threshold with these kinds of weapons.
I think that's a fair assessment. It's not just about having the tech. It's about the doctrine and the political will to actually use it.
So let's dig into that strategic edge. Why choose one of these megabombs over, say, a small tactical nuclear weapon? If you're a general, you need massive destructive power for a specific target.
Okay, imagine you're that general. You could use a small nuke, but the moment you do, boom, global political firestorm.
Yeah.
Decades of diplomacy potentially up in smoke, sanctions, alliances shifting. It's huge.
Right. The political fallout is potentially way bigger than the radioactive fallout.
Exactly. With a non-nuclear megabomb, yes, it's hugely destructive, but it doesn't carry that same existential dread, that same level of global taboo. The political cost is significantly lower.
And then there's the environment, no long-term radioactive contamination.
Which is a massive factor, especially if you plan to operate in, occupy, or rebuild that area later. You don't want your own troops moving through a radioactive zone.
And tactically, they're just better suited for some things, right? Those deep bunkers, reinforced tunnels.
Absolutely. They're designed precisely for those hard-to-reach, hardened targets where conventional bombs just bounce off or don't penetrate deep enough. So if you're that general and full-scale nuclear war is completely unthinkable, which tool do you pick?
For the U.S., at least, the answer has clearly been these megabombs on several occasions.
It has. And it hasn't gone unnoticed, obviously.
No, definitely not. How have other nations reacted when the U.S. has actually used these things in combat?
Well, you certainly see discussions flare up. Debates at the UN, diplomatic protests, lots of international chatter. It's a sensitive topic because the sheer destructive power is immense, even if it's not nuclear.
And what's really interesting, maybe worrying, is the lack of specific rules around them.
That's a crucial point.
Hmm.
Unlike nuclear weapons, which are governed by a whole raft of treaties and agreements, there are no specific international treaties banning these particular types of massive non-nuclear bombs.
So it's a kind of gray area in international law.
A very ambiguous area, yes. And it raises big questions about future regulation, especially now, with current geopolitical tensions running high.
Yeah, you look at recent events and the implications of this unregulated space, they feel much more immediate, don't they?
They really do. It suggests a future where the boundaries of what's considered acceptable destruction might keep shifting, without clear international rules to guide things. It's uncharted territory, legally and ethically.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, let's just underline that core distinction again. It's really striking.
It is, this divergence in military thinking and action.
On one side, you've got the United States actively using these massive non-nuclear bombs in conflict zones, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iran, making that tactical choice.
The choice with huge strategic weight behind it.
And then on the other side, you have nations like Russia and China. They've put serious resources into developing their own huge non-nuclear weapons, the FOAB, the Chinese device.
They've demonstrated the capability, they've tested them, made sure the world knows they have them.
And it's a big but, they haven't deployed them in combat. Solely testing and deterrence, it seems.
It sets up this fascinating dynamic. One nation actively using the capability, others holding it perhaps more as a deterrent or a signal.
Which leaves us with a really provocative thought, doesn't it? What is this whole picture, the development, the testing, but especially the varied use, tell us about where warfare is heading, especially in a world trying so hard to keep the nuclear genie in the bottle?
Yeah, and how might new technologies complicate this even further? Think about AI in targeting systems. Could that make using these weapons seem easier, more precise? Could it blur the ethical lines even more?
It feels like this powerful line between conventional and, well, something else is constantly being drawn and redrawn right in front of us.
It really is. It shows that ongoing tension between seeking ultimate military power and the global restraints trying to hold it back. We're watching it unfold, and the implications for what comes next are, frankly, profound.